Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Eh bien, on va commencer. Sangye Chutong Soki Chonam La Chanchu Patu Ni Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Pesanam Ki Chola Penshi Ye Rupa Shu Sangye Chutong Soki Chonam La Chanchu Patu Dani Chi Dagi Jinso Ki Pesanam Ki Chola Penshi Sangye Pashu Sangye Chutong Ki Chonam La Chanchu Tu Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Ki Pesanam Ki Chola Penshi Sangye Chupashu Samshen Tamshe Deo Tong De Wei Kyu Tong Den Kyu Chi Tu Ne Ki Kyu Der Wo Kyu Chi Me Pe De Wa Tong Ba Min Re Lo Kyu Chi Nye Rin Cha Dong Wei Tan Yom Shen Po La Pa Kyu Chi Pel Den Sa Wei Rinpoche Chi Wo Pe Me Den Shul Kadri Chen Pe Gone Sun Te Kusun Tuki Chub Sel Tu Sa Chom Den De Cham Pe Yang La Chak Sel Lo Gangi Lo Che Trim Trin Da Ne Ta Nam Da Sel We Chi Nye Den Ku Chi Shi Si Shi Iki Tu Ka Bam Zim Gang Dak Si Pe Tsan Ha Ma Men Dom Dung Nel Ki Si We Do Tso Ku Na Bu Chi Ta Si La Do Shu Yang Den Song Do Ta Che Do Nye Mon Ni Long Le Ki Sha Do To Ze Ching Marik Me Se Du Yogu Jinye Che Se Ren Trinam De Ne Da Shi Sa Chu Nyan Te Lu So Gyal Se Tu We Ku Chu Da Chu Dan Chu Ni Gen Da Kle Me Se Jam Yang La Tu Se Den Ke Ki Ken Ha Be Se Ki Da Kle Ti Mu Min Pa Ram Se Katan Te She Shu Lu To Pa Yi Lo Che Po Pe Na Wa Zel Tu Sa. Donc dans les 5 véhicules, donc on a vu d'abord les véhicules mondains, le véhicule des dieux et des hommes et le véhicule de Brahma. Et donc là on est en train de voir les véhicules qui mènent au-delà du monde. Et dans ces 3 véhicules qui mènent au-delà du monde, donc on a vu le Shravakayana, le Pratyeka-Buddhayana, et on est en train de voir le dernier de ces 3 véhicules, le Mahayana. Et dans la présentation du Mahayana, il y a 2 grandes parties. La première présente la différence entre les véhicules fondamentaux et le Mahayana. Et la deuxième partie présente le Mahayana en tant que tel. Et donc là, on est dans la première partie qui présente la différence entre les véhicules fondamentaux et le Mahayana. Et on a déjà vu 3 différences entre les véhicules fondamentaux et le Mahayana. La première différence, c'est la vue.
First difference is the view. The second difference is the particularity of the intention and application. The third is what is abandoned on the path. Yesterday we concluded by looking at this difference, this brings us to the fourth difference between the foundational vehicles and the Mahayana. This fourth difference is the goal, the fruit to actualize, to be actualized. Concerning practitioners of the two foundational vehicles, at the end of their path, they actualize the non-existence of the identity of the individual, and they abide in peace. The state of arhathood is abiding in this state of peace without taking rebirth in samsara in order to accomplish the benefit of being. According to the Mahayana, concerning this state of arhathood, this concerns limited knowledge of emptiness. This is why the final goal of these two vehicles is the state of arhathood, and why this is inferior to the result of Mahayana. In the Mahayana, a bodhisattva, due to the method of great compassion, they will take rebirth in samsara in order to accomplish the benefit of being. A bodhisattva who takes birth in samsara is not subject to the confusion of samsara the way that we may be. A bodhisattva's mind is not confused because they possess the discernment of the non-existence of identity of individual and phenomena. This brings us to the fifth point, which explains the differences between the two foundational vehicles and the Mahayana. This point explains the 7 greatnesses particular to the Mahayana. These 7 greatnesses appear in a work that's called the Sutralankara, that was composed by Maitreya and Asanga. The first greatness of the Mahayana is the greatness of the focal point. The Tripitaka of the Mahayana, in other words, the 3 baskets, the basket of the sutras, the basket of the Abhidharma, and the basket of the Vinaya. These baskets gather together all of Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings. The Tripitaka of the Mahayana is vaster than that of the foundational vehicles. Therefore, study and reflection in this context, the context of this Tripitaka, are also vaster. In other words, they are vaster in the context of the Mahayana than in the foundational vehicles. The second greatness is the greatness of the accomplishment. In the Mahayana, one's own benefit and that of others are accomplished, whereas in the two foundational vehicles, the benefit of beings, the benefit of other beings, is not carried out on the same level or to the same scale, on the same scale as in the Mahayana. The third greatness is the greatness of wisdom. Somebody was asking a question about the last one. The third one is the greatness of wisdom. In the Mahayana, the non-existence of identity in terms of its two perspectives, the perspective of the individual and the perspective of phenomena, is actualized. In the two foundational vehicles, primarily the non-existence of identity of the individual is actualized. The fourth greatness is the greatness of perseverance. In the Sutralankara, it says that a bodhisattva perseveres on the path up until the state of a Buddha for a very long time, a period of at least 3 immeasurable kalpas or eons. A practitioner of the Shravakayana or Pratyeka Buddhayana does not train for as long a time. The fifth greatness is greatness of skillfulness in methods. A bodhisattva takes birth many times to accomplish the benefit of beings. During these births, they dedicate themselves solely to accomplishing the benefit of beings. And even if, from an outer perspective, they engage in one of the 7 types of harmful actions of body or speech, it's always with the goal of accomplishing the benefit of beings. We can say that they are more skillful in terms of methods because they're able to accomplish what are otherwise harmful actions of body and speech, but in order to accomplish the benefit of beings, which practitioners of the 2 foundational vehicles do not do. In the Jatakas, the stories of the Buddha's past lives, there are numerous examples of this type of conduct. For example, during one of the Buddha's lives prior to becoming the Buddha, when he was not the Buddha, not yet the Buddha, but on the path, during one of these lives, he killed a bandit in order to save 500 lives because he was more concerned with the suffering that would be experienced by these 500 people, as well as that of the bandit, than his own suffering. He preferred to risk suffering in the hell realms due to his own actions than for the 500 people to experience suffering of death and the bandit himself if he had accomplished this action. So then the Buddha experienced, the Buddha did experience the consequences of this action. He took rebirth for a very short time in the Hell Realms. The sixth greatness is the greatness of perfect accomplishments. This concerns the qualities of the enlightened state of Buddhahood, which are vaster than those associated with the state of Arhathood. This concerns, for example, the 10 powers and the 4 fearlessnesses. The seventh greatness is the greatness of activity. What's said here is that a Buddha's activity for the benefit of beings manifests in an uninterrupted way up until the end of samsara. Concerning an arhat, once the state of arhathood without remains, the arhat remains in this state for 10 immeasurable kalpas without acting for the benefit of beings. Then they will awaken to the Mahayana, give rise to Bodhicitta, enlightened mind, and accomplish the Mahayana path, which will lead to accomplishing the full and perfect enlightenment of a Buddha. But when they attain this state of arhat, for the benefit of beings, whereas a Buddha accomplishes the benefit of beings in an uninterrupted way up until the end of samsara. This concludes the first part. The first part, which concerns the differences between the foundational vehicles and the Mahayana. This brings us to the second part, which is the presentation of the Mahayana, the great vehicle, in and of itself. This part covers 2 aspects. The 2 vehicles that belong to the Mahayana. In fact, the first aspect concerns the Sutrayana, which we call the causal vehicle of characteristics. First, there will be a brief presentation, and then a more detailed presentation. And then, following this, the second vehicle that belongs to the great vehicle, the resulting vehicle, the Vajrayana, with a brief presentation and a slightly more detailed presentation. We'll begin with the brief presentation of the Sutrayana. Khenpo said that on the basis of Buddhist sutras, the state of Buddhahood is approached in this vehicle in a progressive way. So the state of Buddhahood takes longer to accomplish in this vehicle than in the Tantrayana. Why is this vehicle, the Sutrayana, also called the causal vehicle of characteristics? So let's start with why causal. because this vehicle is characterized by practices, methods, that if they are applied appropriately, they are the causes which allow for the actualization of the fruit, perfect enlightenment. This is why this vehicle is said to be causal, and why of characteristics. Khenpo explained that the term characteristics here means that this vehicle clearly explains what the characteristics of samsara are and what the characteristics of nirvana are. So that's a brief explanation of the etymology of the terms that are used when we talk about the Sutrayana, which is the causal vehicle of characteristics. Then this goes on to a brief presentation of the etymology of the Tantrayana, called the resultant vehicle. Why is it called a resultant vehicle? In this vehicle, a practitioner directly employs certain characteristics of the result, in other words, enlightenment, in order to actualize this result. The methods consist in employing different characteristics of the result of enlightenment. This vehicle allows for quickly realizing the state of Buddhahood. That is the brief etymological presentation of these two. Now we'll go into a slightly more detailed presentation of the first vehicle that is included in the Mahayana, the Great Vehicle. This is the Sutrayana, or the causal vehicle of characteristics. The first question that Khenpo asked is, how does a practitioner of the Mahayana have to begin, whether they are starting out on the causal vehicle or the resultant vehicle? So this part will be applicable for both vehicles of the Great Vehicle. In order to answer this question, Khenpo said, in the beginning, it is said that a practitioner must possess a vast mindset, that they need to generate supreme enlightened mind. In order to do this, it is necessary to possess great courage. Why great courage? Because the number of sentient beings that are prisoner in samsara is infinite. This is what is said, for example, in one of the stanzas of Samantabhadra's aspiration prayer. Everywhere that there is space, there are sentient beings. Everywhere that there are sentient beings, there are actions and afflictive obscurations. Everywhere that there are actions and obscurations, there is suffering. Enlightened mind, or the thought, the wish to accomplish the benefit of beings, is something very vast. furthermore, in the Sutra Lankara, there is a point on vast state of mind and great perseverance. In the beginning, one needs this vast state of mind, and then great perseverance is necessary. Whatever actions need to be accomplished in connection with this vast state of mind, it's necessary to carry them out with energy without becoming discouraged. Therefore, great perseverance is necessary. Then Khenpo asked us, if someone is capable of developing this vast state of mind and this great perseverance, then, where's the question? Then, I don't think it's a question. Then they can make this commitment toward supreme enlightened mind in its two aspects of aspiration and application. Then Khenpo asks another question. What is the nature of enlightened mind that the practitioner commits to? What is enlightened mind? He answers this question with a quotation from the Prajnaparamita. Enlightened mind consists in wanting to attain authentic, perfect enlightenment for the benefit of others. Enlightened mind involves two reference points. Compassion that focuses on all beings, as vast in number as space, and discernment focusing on perfect enlightenment. These are the two reference points concerning enlightened mind. Compassion that focuses on all beings, and discernment that focuses on perfect enlightenment. Then Khenpo said, enlightened mind can be divided into two categories, relative enlightened mind and absolute enlightened mind. When a beginner, like us, generates enlightened mind, this concerns relative enlightened mind. Relative enlightened mind has two aspects. Enlightened mind in aspiration and enlightened mind in action. Generating enlightened mind aspiration is thinking, starting from today, I commit to one day actualizing the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings who are as vast in number as space. The commitment to actualizing this result is enlightened mind and aspiration. concerning enlightened mind and action, this concerns first thinking. In order to attain this result, I will train in the 6 paramitas. And then it concerns doing so, training in the 6 paramitas. It is a phase of training in the 6 paramitas, the 6 transcendent virtues. Here, Khenpo says, we're not yet bringing the paramitas all the way to their conclusion. They're not yet transcendent virtues, but we're training in them. Concerning the discipline or vow of enlightened mind, in the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha, we find 2 transmission lineages. The first transmission lineage of the vows of enlightened mind is the lineage of profound view, which is associated with the Indian Buddhist master Nagarjuna. Profound view lineage associated with the Indian Buddhist master Nagarjuna. The second lineage is the lineage of vast conduct, which is associated with the Indian Buddhist master Asanga. These lineages did not only develop in Tibet, but also in all the countries that practice Mahayana, China, for example. Khenpo clarified that in various texts of the Mahayana that are associated with Bodhisattva vows, there's also a mention of the lineage of spiritual influence. In this lineage of spiritual influence, there are specific key instructions. However, Khenpo said this lineage of spiritual influence is not a lineage in and of itself. It's rather a supplementary characteristic that is included in these 2 lineages, the lineage of profound view and the lineage of vast conduct. This supreme enlightened mind is the heart of the practice of the sutras and the practice of the tantras that make up the 2 divisions of the Mahayana. If we practice the sutras or the tantras without enlightened mind, there isn't really any benefit. For example, in the case of the tantras, on the basis of a certain number of practices of the Tantrayana, we can attain extraordinary capacities. But if these practices are accomplished without connecting to enlightened mind, then they're not practices of the Mahayana. That's what Rinpoche has been telling us for the last 2 days. Concerning practice connected with enlightened mind, this can be summed up by the practice of the 6 paramitas. According to the Sutra of the Prajnaparamita, there are 3 types of individuals classified according to their abilities. First, there is an individual of weak ability. This is a beginner practitioner on the path of accumulation. This practitioner can train on a large scale in the first 5 paramitas, but concerning the 6th paramita of discernment, they are not yet able to practice it in a great way. On the path of accumulation, the practice of the paramita of discernment is solely based on understanding acquired on the basis of study and reflection. Meaning we're not yet capable of practicing it in a fast way. When we're on the path of accumulation, it's like walking to a place that's very far away that we'd like to go. For example, if we want to go to Paris by foot, it will take us a long time and it'll be very tiring. A practitioner who is an individual of inferior ability will take a very long time to accomplish what they wish, whether it's the paramita of generosity, etc. It'll take a long time to accomplish this, and it won't be easy for them. When a practitioner arrives at the path of junction, then they will develop greater capacity and they'll become a practitioner of superior ability. The analogy given in the Sutra of the Paramita is that of someone who is traveling in a chariot, which is pulled by oxen. This example is contemporary to ancient India. We don't have a lot of experience with that, but we can imagine it. When we're traveling in a chariot that is pulled by oxen, we won't have much difficulty. Certainly in comparison with going somewhere by foot. It may take a while to get to Paris in a cart pulled by oxen, but it'll be a lot easier than going by foot. But it'll still take a while. Not as quick as the train. This example illustrates the fact that someone on the path of junction has familiarized themselves with emptiness. Therefore, they no longer have much difficulty when they practice the paramitas. They can practice them in a fast way. Indeed, as it was explained, the more familiar we are with emptiness, the easier it is to do things because our state of mind is much less narrow. We can take the example of someone on the path of accumulation. If this person needs glasses to read and someone else comes while they're in the middle of reading something and they break their glasses, then that person will get angry because they can't read anymore. They'll be furious with the person who has broken their glasses. Why? Because their understanding of emptiness is only intellectual. The limitations imposed on their mind due to the belief in the idea of a self has not yet disappeared. They intellectually understand the emptiness of the individual or a phenomena, but they have not yet integrated this understanding. This is why they have the reaction of anger. If we use the same example, but with a person on the path of junction, this practitioner has integrated a much vaster understanding of emptiness. They have profound experiences of emptiness. Therefore, they consider themselves and what surrounds them to be emptiness. If the same thing happens to them, they won't have the same reaction. They may have a moment of anger, but this anger won't continue. After the individual of weak ability and individual of superior ability, this brings us to an individual who is a practitioner of much superior ability, far superior ability. A practitioner of far superior ability has accomplished the path of seeing. They have direct knowledge of emptiness. When they practice the 6 paramitas, generosity, refreshing conduct, etc., as they see, because they see the emptiness of all phenomena and all situations, they are able to practice the paramitas on a very large scale, a vast scale. This far superior ability is compared to a cart pulled by horses. A cart pulled by horses allows one to go somewhere very quickly and without difficulty. We can get where we want to go very quickly and without difficulty. As I said, these examples were given in the context of ancient India. We can adapt them to our current context. We could eventually say, perhaps say it's like traveling by foot, traveling on an electric scooter, or traveling in a car. Then, starting from the path of seeing, the more that a bodhisattva progresses along the grounds of enlightenment, bhumis, then the more their practice of the paramitas will be vast and easy. To sum things up, regardless of the level of a bodhisattva, the path of a bodhisattva consists in the practice of the 6 paramitas. Concerning detailed explanations of the paramitas, you can refer to the Precious Ornament of Liberation of Khenpo, where they are explained in detail. So we are currently focusing on the detailed presentation of the Sutrayana. We started by talking about what is necessary for practitioners of the Great Vehicle, whether of the Sutrayana or the Tantrayana, what it is necessary for a practitioner to develop in the beginning of these paths. In other words, enlightened mind and aspiration and in action. Then Khenpo spoke to us about a categorization of the Mahayana in terms of schools of thought. So here we're no longer talking about sub-vehicles included in the Mahayana, but rather schools of thought. Khenpo explained that we can find two schools of thought that belong to the Mahayana vehicle. These are the Chitramata school of thought and the Madhyamaka school of thought. These two schools of thought, Chitramata and Madhyamaka, are both part of the Mahayana, the Great Vehicle. Practitioners who adhere to each of these two schools of thought, these two types of established conclusions, these practitioners practice the 6 paramitas because they are practitioners of the Mahayana. Concerning application on the path, there's no difference between the different practitioners of the Mahayana, whether they are adepts of the Chitramata school of thought or the Madhyamaka school of thought. Differences then appear in terms of the viewpoint concerning ultimate reality and relative reality. So once again, no difference in terms of application on the path, but a difference concerning the point of view or established conclusion. Khenpo told us that a great number of past masters, whether in India or Tibet, practiced the Mahayana, whether it was the Sutrayana or the Tantrayana. Some adopted the Chitramata point of view, others adopted the Madhyamaka point of view. On the basis of these 2 points of view, of one of these points of view, and the practice of one of these vehicles, the Sutrayana or Tantrayana, all of these great masters of the past became accomplished panditas. They all obtained accomplishments, regardless of the point of view that was adopted within the Mahayana, and regardless of the vehicle adopted within the Mahayana. Khenpo gave us a brief presentation of these schools of thought. You can imagine that if we wanted to give a detailed explanation, it would take much longer. We're just going to very briefly look at what this concerns. We'll start with the first one. Let's begin with the Chittamatra school of thought. To begin this explanation of the Chittamatra school of thought, we need to remember that reality is fundamentally made up of matter on the one hand and mind on the other hand. That's a basic foundation. In the 2 schools of thought of the foundational vehicles, the Vaibhashika school of thought and the Sautrantika school of thought, matter that makes up the outer world has or includes, involves an absolute perspective. These 2 schools of thought of the foundational vehicles consider that extremely subtle particles of matter exist, that these particles cannot be divided into smaller units. So from their point of view, this doesn't mean that a table truly exists. For example, the table is nothing more than a collection, a gathering of particles of matter. So the table doesn't exist in and of itself. However, the indivisible particles, the tiniest particles that make up this table, these two schools of thought hold that these indivisible particles truly exist. In the Great Vehicle, in the Mahayana, the viewpoint is different. If we consider the first Mahayana school of thought, the Chittamatra school of thought, this school of thought rejects the idea that indivisible particles of matter that truly exist. They don't agree with this. Furthermore, they explain, the Chittamatrans explain, that all phenomena are simply the manifestation of mind itself. They explain that no outer reality can be established. There is nothing outside of mind that can be established as truly existing. Indeed, if we use reasoning to examine these famous indivisible particles of the foundational vehicles or schools of thought, these particles said to be indivisible, even if they're very, very small, as small as they may be, they still involve directions, sides. The fact that these infinitely small particles involve directions, sides, is what allows them to stick together, to agglomerate, to make coarser matter. If they didn't have directions, sides to them, they wouldn't be able to stick together to make larger, coarser matter. The fact that these particles have directions or sides implies that they are made up of parts, and therefore they are not indivisible. This is the reasoning that notably the Chittamatra school of thought brings, and thus they arrive at the conclusion that there are not indivisible particles of matter that exist anywhere. The Chittamatra school continues. They say, there is nothing real that can constitute the basis for material manifestation. There is no basis to material manifestation that is truly existing. Despite this, manifestation appears. This does not prevent manifestation from appearing. Tables appear, flowers appear, things appear. What they say, the Chittamatrans say that There is no appearance of manifestation without a mind that focuses on this manifestation. If something exists, this thing must be known by mind. If there is no knowledge of a phenomena, we cannot say that it exists. Therefore, the manifestation of an object appears based on mind's focus. Therefore, there can be no object able to exist without a mind that focuses on it. This is why that the Chittamatra hold that nothing exists other than mind. Everything is nothing but mind. In fact, this is what Chittamatra means, mind only. They don't say, however, that mind produces the outer world. What they say, rather, is that what manifests, what appears on the basis of the mind that knows it. In other words, on the basis of latent imprints of mind. This does not mean that mind constructs or produces the world. I'm going to repeat the last sentence. It's necessary to be clear that mind does not produce or construct the outer world. Rather, what appears, what manifests, appears on the basis of the mind that knows it. In other words, on the basis of latent imprints. How does this outer manifestation appear? It appears because we maintain the belief, the conception that things are real. This conception that grasps things as being real. Due to the strength, power of these latent imprints that grows over time, manifestation appears to beings. Due to the strength of latent imprints, manifestation appears to beings. Concerning latent imprints, Khenpo explained to us that there are two types. There are common latent imprints, in other words, latent imprints that are common to specific types of beings, common to human beings, for example. And then there are latent imprints, individual latent imprints, or not common latent imprints. Unshared latent imprints. Common latent imprints that are common to specific types of beings, such as human beings, refers to imprints that make us all consider the world in the same way. For example, as a human being, when we see a mountain, we all agree that it's a mountain. When we see a river, we all agree that it's a river. Same for cities, same for many types of phenomena. We all have latent imprints that are common to all of us, that are similar concerning the world. Whereas other types of beings, such as animals, will have different latent imprints. Fish, for example, if we consider fish, they will consider the water of their rivers, the water of rivers, for example, as their home, their habitat, whereas we consider it either we look at the water and we see something beautiful that's flowing, or if it's pure enough, we might think of it as water to drink or water to splash our faces and refresh ourselves, but we won't think of it as our home, our environment. I'm not going to go live in the river in any case. That covers the first type of latent imprints that are common to specific types of beings. Then there are unshared latent imprints, not common latent imprints. These refer to the fact that every person experiences sensations that are particular to themselves. Every person reacts differently according to the experiences that they have been through. Furthermore, Khenpo said to us, if the outer world were not the manifestation of mind, in other words, if the outer world were made up of indivisible, truly existing particles of matter that exist independently of the mind that perceives them, this would mean that all beings would experience the outer world in the same way. The outer world would be an entity that exists separately from the mind that perceives it, and individuals would not be able to perceive it in different ways. If something is real, Khenpo said to us, if something truly exists, it is the same for everyone. There can't be any variation. If it truly exists in an independent way, then it cannot vary, it cannot change. Then Khenpo gave an example. He said, in the West, in general, an overweight person is considered to be unattractive. By contrast, in Tibet, such a person is considered to be beautiful because they're large, they're impressive. So this simply concerns latent imprints in the mind. Beauty, ugliness, these things are not, they don't belong to the body. They don't have any reality independent from a person's perception. Khenpo shared this example to illustrate that everything is just the manifestation of latent imprints of our minds. On the basis of these latent imprints, great confusion occurs. Indeed, I believe that the outer manifestation of my latent imprints is something that truly exists. And this is how I wind up in illusion. Illusion or confusion consists in considering manifestation rising from mind to be truly existing. Illusion or confusion consists in believing in the true existence of manifestation, despite the fact that this manifestation has no true independent reality apart from the mind that perceives it. then, in the Chittamatra school of thought, it is said that mind is a succession of animate and knowing moments, and these individual moments truly exist. According to them, the succession of moments never ends. No one can stop mind. No one can stop this continuum of moments. This mental continuum continues on its own. It has its own life, its own identity in a way. This is why they consider the continuum of animate knowing moments to be truly existing. They hold that these individual moments that are animate and knowing truly exist. I propose that we take a short silent break. Khenpo briefly presented the Chittamatra school of thought. Then he briefly presented the Madhyamaka school of thought, the other school of thought we find in the Mahayana. Oh no, yeah. He said that the Madhyamaka agree with the Chittamatran that everything mind perceives is a manifestation of latent imprints. However, for the Madhyamaka, the animate and knowing moments of consciousness, of mind, do not truly exist. This is in contrast with the Chittamatrans, who believe that the animate and knowing moments of mind truly exist. The Madhyamaka say that affirming that mind truly exists is essentially making the same mistake as the other schools of thought. They believe that the Chittamatrans are mistaken. For the Madhyamaka school of thought, the nature of mind is empty. But this emptiness is not a nothingness. This emptiness allows uninterrupted manifestation. So even though for the Madhyamaka, this nature of mind, the nature of mind is empty, emptiness. It's not a vacuum, it's not nothingness. Rather, emptiness allows for manifestation to appear. That is a very brief presentation that Khenpo gave on the two Mahayana schools of thought, the Chittamatra school of thought and the Madhyamaka school of thought. In the second part, about the Mahayana. So once again, we're looking at the presentation of the Mahayana in and of itself. We concluded the first part, which presents the causal vehicle of characteristics, the Sutrayana. This brings us to the second part on the resultant vehicle of the Tantras, or the Tantrayana. Khenpo gave a pretty short explanation here concerning the resultant vehicle of the Tantras. He said this is one of the two approaches, the first being the Sutrayana, this is the second one. Concerning the Tantrayana, there are 4 classes of Tantras. These Tantras are methods that need to be practiced on the basis of enlightened mind and a correct view. What is the difference between the Buddhist Tantras and the Sutrayana? The difference is linked with the methods. There are many more methods in the Buddhist Tantras than in the Sutrayana. Furthermore, these methods are more profound in the Tantrayana. Because the methods of the Tantrayana are more profound, they allow someone who practices them correctly to attain the enlightened state of Buddhahood rapidly. The example that everyone knows is the example of Milarepa, who attained enlightenment in one lifetime by practicing the Tantrayana. This concludes the presentation of the Mahayana. The Mahayana was the 5th vehicle, so this brings us to the end of our presentation of the 5 vehicles. Khenpo concluded by saying, we finished this 3rd part of the teaching, which was a brief presentation of the progression on the path according to the different vehicles. We saw in this presentation of the vehicles that certain aspects need to be practiced by practitioners of all 3 yanas that lead beyond the world. This concerns the four truths of the Noble Ones. The four truths of the Noble Ones need to be practiced in the Shravakayana, Pratyekabudayana. There's a little error, but we're translating it correctly. They need to be practiced within the three vehicles that lead beyond the world: the Shravakayana, the Pratyekabudayana, and the Mahayana. The first of the four truths is the truth of suffering, as we saw. What must be recognized? This concerns recognizing that the three realms of samsara are nothing but suffering. The second aspect is the truth of origin. This is what is to be abandoned. We saw that in order to cut off the roots of suffering, a Buddhist practitioner needs to understand and abandon the truth of origin of suffering, which is made up of actions and afflictive obscurations, as well as, or including, grasping an identity, which is the foundation for the other afflictive obscurations, because it is an afflictive obscuration, and actions. Then there is the truth of the path. This is what we rely on to actualize the fruit. We saw that this grasping of an identity that is the foundation for afflictive obscurations and actions is abandoned by practicing a path. The difference between the vehicles lies in how we use the path to arrive at abandoning, giving up self-grasping or grasping at an identity. For example, the methods of shamatha and vipassana, shine and lakdong, mental calm and higher vision, these methods of shamatha and vipassana are presented in all of the vehicles. On the other hand, the methods of familiarization with shamatha and vipassana differ depending on the vehicle. In the three yanas of the Shravakayana, Pratyekabudayana, and Mahayana, the goal is to tame or master mind, animate and knowing mind. In order to master it, we need to use the methods of the path. There are no methods other than these two methods of shamatha and vipassana. First, mind must abide in calm. This happens thanks to the practice of shamatha. When mind is calm and clear, when it is no longer disturbed by agitations, distractions, etc., then it becomes possible to see the nature of mind by practicing vipassana. And lastly, there is the truth of cessation, what is to be actualized. by abandoning the confusion of samsara, we actualize the truth of cessation. The fruit or result obtained by practicing the path is different depending on the vehicle at hand. As we saw, the fruit obtained in the Shravakayana, or at the conclusion of the Shravakayana or Pratyabhuddhayana, is the state of arhathood. And the fruit obtained, thanks to the Mahayana, is the state of Buddhahood. Depending on the path we practice, the result will be different. We have concluded this presentation. If you have questions, we have 5 minutes. I have a few. First, often we talk about the little vehicle, the great vehicle, and we heard about the little vehicle, the ordinary vehicle, great vehicle. How are these connected? Can we say that the ordinary vehicle is the little vehicle? What's called the little vehicle, maybe the lesser vehicle in English, is in contrast with the great vehicle. This is what we translate by foundational vehicle. I believe this comes from Shamarpa, who had said that it's important not to talk about a little or lesser vehicle, even though in Tibetan that's the literal translation. I believe it was Shamarpa. Was it Khenpo? No, I'm pretty sure it was Shamar Rinpoche. In any case, he said that it was important not to call the Shravakayana and the Pratyabhuddhayana the lesser vehicle because it plants an idea in the mind that these are inferior vehicles. Whereas, as we saw during these 2 sessions, that this is not the case. These vehicles are the basis for the great vehicle. This is why we prefer to talk about foundational vehicles. And that's, if memory serves, that's what Shamarpa encouraged. So the name is different, but the classification is the same vehicles. What we call, scare quotes, the lesser vehicle is the foundational vehicles. The Shravakayana and the Pratyabhuddha concerns the Mahayana, in other words, the Sutrayana and the Tantrayana. Then concerning the 7 greatnesses, concerning the greatness of perseverance, it was something about 3 kalpas, but then it said that the arhats train for 100 kalpas and then 40 kalpas. In fact, a bodhisattva trains for 3 immeasurable kalpas, which is longer. So an immeasurable kalpa is longer than a kalpa. An immeasurable kalpa is longer than 40 kalpas or 100 kalpas. That's why it's called that. The immeasurable kalpa is longer than the rest. Okay, so then I didn't understand why the indivisible particles that has directions or sides, why does this consist in an argument to say that they are composed, that they're made up of parts? I need to find a particle. Okay, here we go. This is a particle. In any case, this is what I understood. If a particle has directions, in other words, it has a northern direction, a western direction, an eastern direction, a southern direction, or a top side, a bottom side, a right side, a left side, this means that I could potentially cut the particle into the left side, the right side, the top side, the bottom side. I can divide my particle into parts, a left part, a right part, a top part, a bottom part. Therefore, it's got parts, which means that it's divisible, and it is not indivisible. Pardon? Mm-hmm. Can you please remind me what the form and the formless realms are? The desire realm, okay, but the form and the formless realms. Thanks. In the form realm, as its name indicates, there are forms. The individuals who are present in this form world, form realm, experience forms. There are bodies. Is it? You want us to repeat what we said during the session? Details? We're not necessarily going to go into a lot of details on that. Julie seems inspired. Go ahead. I'm not inspired. I'm just going to repeat what we said the first day. If you want more details than what's said here, then you need to listen to the presentation of the truth of suffering from the entry to the state of Apandita, because there's lots of details on all the levels of all the realms, desire realm, form realm, formless realm. If you want more details about that, you'll find it in that work, The Entry via the State of Apandita. Here, Khenpo just gave a really brief presentation. I wanted to come back to the Hinayana. Shama Rinpoche gave a teaching at Dhagpo. We can find it in the Tendril magazine. And he said that this classic presentation of Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, in fact, it's not classic. It occurred because early masters like Shogyam Trungpa and Kalu Rinpoche had to adapt to their students, and then it got settled in, let's say. People got used to it, but in fact, it creates some problems in terms of students' perspectives on these different schools. And so he asked for students to really reconsider this, and it also creates problems in terms of our perspective on the paths. So yeah, you can find that teaching in the Tendril magazine, and thank you for the presentation, which helped clarify a lot of that. If there are no further questions, I propose that we conclude here and dedicate.
Sunam diye tamche sikpa Janam pamje ne chegan na che palab chokpa ye simbe tsole rowa janwara jo chambelam bave chitara chambat Kundu Sangbo Deyang Deshin Deta Gunki Jisu Dalop Ching Kewa Detara Tamchi Rabdu Sanji Kusum Nyebe Jinlab Dong Chunyi Minjur Denbe Jinlab Dong Kendun Michi Tenbe Jinrab Ki Chitarang Hoa Mulam Robarai Sho